Why did you come to the university hospital? You can't seriously think a doctor can fix being uneducated and poor." Mike smirked, clearly amused with himself. I barely reacted, unimpressed by his arrogance. "That's none of your concern, Mike. You're always so aloof. But no matter how prestigious the hospital, they can't cure ignorance or poverty." I didn't even bother with a fake laugh at his weak attempt at humor. Then suddenly, a nurse came rushing toward us. She looked directly at me, waving urgently. "Doctor, we have an emergency. The patient's unconscious and in critical condition. Please come quickly." My name is Jessica, and I'm the oldest of 4 siblings. When I was in elementary school, our father passed away, leaving our mother to raise us on her own. The debt he left behind made it nearly impossible for her to make ends meet, no matter how hard she worked. At her request, I dropped out of high school to take a job at a nearby factory, determined to support my family so that my siblings could pursue their dreams without the burden of financial strain. Everything changed when I turned 18. After several dinner invitations from my supervisor, he asked me if I'd considered dating him. I had already developed feelings for him, so I agreed. Our relationship blossomed, and 2 years later, on my 20th birthday, he proposed. I said yes, and we got married. His name was Mike. From the start, I was honest with Mike about not finishing high school. He'd assured me, education doesn't matter when you love someone. He always tried to create a relationship based on honesty and equality. Even though he was several years older, he never treated me condescendingly and genuinely valued me. But over time, that seemed to change. His attitude toward me shifted, and he began to look down on me. "Do you even realize who's been supporting your lifestyle? You should be more grateful," Mike said, his voice tinged with irritation. Mike's words made me flinch. When we got married, I left my job at the factory because he insisted so strongly that I become a stay-at-home wife. I had intended to keep working, but he told me, "I want you to take care of the household chores, and I expect a warm meal and a tidy home every day." Despite my worries about sending less money back home, I didn't argue and quit my job. Now, he sees me as nothing more than an unemployed, wasteful burden. "I actually want to work," I finally found the courage to say, but he just laughed at me. "Do you really think any company would hire a high school dropout like you? Your place is here, taking care of our home," he replied coldly. His words struck a chord with me. Maybe quitting my job, just as Mike wanted, had been a mistake. The allowance he gives me has been steadily shrinking, and I know if I complain about the lack of money, he'll probably blame my budgeting skills. So I stay silent and cover the shortfall with the savings I've been carefully building up. As I watched him relax with a drink, the thought of divorce began to creep into my mind. I'm still young. I could end this marriage, start fresh with someone else, and even have children. Mike likely hasn't noticed the depth of my distress, assuming I'm just a selfish, shallow woman. While I wrestled with these cold thoughts and feelings, I found myself trapped in contemplation. The dwindling savings, Mike's growing disdain, and the increasingly tense atmosphere between us. Determined to change our situation, I repeatedly tried to start a conversation with Mike. However, he always managed to find an excuse, claiming he was too tired or had other plans, evading any meaningful discussion. To make things worse, he even told me, "I don't want to talk to someone with such a low educational background." I was at my breaking point. One evening, after cleaning up from dinner, I finally resolved to share my decision with him. The next step was to tell him I wanted a divorce. With my lips dry from nervousness and mustering every ounce of courage, I approached him while he was absorbed in the TV. "Hey, there's something I need to discuss." Hearing the tension in my voice, Mike looked up from his spot with an indifferent expression. I held out the court document and our lawyer's letter, meeting his gaze directly. "I think it would be best if we got a divorce," I said firmly. A deep frown formed on his face. I braced myself for a shouting match, but instead of an outburst, he merely stared at me in silence. I could see his fists clenching and his face turning red with anger. Despite his fury, he held back and didn't let his emotions get the better of him. After a long, tense pause, he finally muttered in a barely audible voice, "Someone with your level of education." His fists clenched even tighter, and his eyes burned with resentment as he glared at me. I instinctively took a step back from his chilling gaze. "You think you have the right to challenge me? With just a high school diploma? You think you can suggest a divorce to your husband?" he shouted, his voice dripping with rage. But I had no intention of backing down. I had endured so much hurt from Mike already. Fighting back tears, I held his gaze steadily. The intensity of my stare seemed to momentarily unsettle him, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. Clutching the divorce papers tightly, I showed him my smartphone, where the screen displayed saved messages between him and a female coworker. Irrefutable evidence of his infidelity. It looks like you've been showering her with gifts even when you couldn't provide for our household. If I'm so unnecessary to you, then let's get a divorce. Free me from this situation. For the first time, my husband was at a loss for words. He clearly hadn't expected me to have evidence of his affair. Perhaps he thought I'd never discover it. Though he struggled to find a response, his attempt at a smirk was laced with sarcasm. Living with someone not so bright can be stressful. I need some occasional refreshment, he said, admitting to the affair with no hint of remorse, then turned back to the TV as if the conversation were over. The emptiness of his response was palpable. I swiftly moved to his side and turned off the TV, filling the room with silence. With his disgruntled gaze now fixed on me, I summoned all my strength to steady my trembling legs. I held out the divorce papers again. All you need to do is sign these. Please, I'm begging you. Why is Mike so resistant to divorce? He despises me, claims to be miserable in our daily life, and yet he clings to the pretense of our marriage while being involved with another woman. Why won't he just leave? I can't make sense of it. If he believes I don't have the right to suggest a divorce, then he should be the one to propose it. I would do anything to distance myself from him. The fear of societal judgment for being served with divorce by my husband and even my own self-worth pale in comparison to my need to escape this situation. If you want a divorce so badly, my husband said with a sigh, taking the court documents in hand, then repay every cent of the living expenses I've covered so far. If you can manage that, I'll consider the divorce. That's absurd. It's impossible, right? After all, you're just an uneducated stay-at-home wife. Mike chuckled lowly, clearly amused. We've been married for 3 years, and during that time, the money he's given me for living expenses has, by even conservative estimates, totaled over $333,000. Although I haven't received much recently, repaying that amount from my savings alone is clearly out of the question. Most of the money went towards monthly rent and groceries, with nothing left for discretionary spending. Despite my efforts to save, I often had to dip into my savings. I couldn't accept his demand. Inside, I was in turmoil. He watched my confusion with a smug grin, and in that moment, a faint spark of determination ignited within me. I was resolved to prove him wrong, and my resolve became unwavering. 12 years later, I found myself standing in the lobby of a university hospital, feeling disoriented. It was my first visit to this facility, and I was lost amid the maze of corridors. The busy staff seemed oblivious to my plight, leaving me stranded. I kept consulting the rough map I held, desperately trying to figure out where I was and where I needed to go. Is that Jessica? I suddenly heard my name called from behind. Turning around in surprise, I saw a middle-aged man standing there. I felt a sense of familiarity, but I couldn't quite place him. I'm sorry, have we met before? I asked, feeling a bit embarrassed. The man sighed and looked at me with a hint of annoyance. Do high school dropouts also forget faces? I can't believe you've forgotten the man you used to be married to. As I studied his face more closely, memories began to resurface, bringing back his familiar, arrogant demeanor. Mike. The moment I said his name, my ex-husband settled into a seat in the lobby, looking quite satisfied. Why are you here at the university hospital? Mike asked with a smirk. Surely you don't think a doctor can fix being uneducated and poor. He seemed quite pleased with his own words and chuckled to himself. I remained unruffled by his smugness. It's none of your business, Mike. You're always so cold, he continued with a sneer. No matter how prestigious this hospital is, I don't think they can cure a lack of education or poverty. I couldn't even muster a polite laugh at his attempt at humor. Just then, a nurse came rushing toward us. She looked in my direction and waved urgently. Doctor, we have an emergency patient. They're unconscious and in critical condition. Please come immediately. I stood up immediately and accepted a lab coat from the nurse. Mike's eyes widened in surprise as he watched me. I'm so sorry about this, especially on your first day here, the nurse said with a bow. There were no other doctors available. She quickly left, leaving Mike to stare after her. I couldn't afford to be distracted by Mike any longer. Not knowing what to do with the hospital brochure I was holding, I handed it to him. Seeing his shocked expression, I simply said, "I'm a doctor." After the emergency treatment was completed, I headed straight to the consultation room. Wandering around the hospital on my own would only leave me disoriented. Even though it was still before my scheduled start time, I decided to begin my work on my first day of transfer. I reviewed the medical chart and was taken aback. As I entered the room, I saw Mike sitting in the examination chair. His expression mirrored my own shock, eyes widening in disbelief. According to the chart, Mike had heart problems and had been referred to this university hospital. I took a deep breath, refocused on my work, and proceeded with the examination. Mike, clearly unsettled, couldn't mask his displeasure. "Is there anything else you'd like to ask?" I inquired as I finished the examination. Mike murmured, "How did someone like you, a high school dropout, become a doctor?" A nurse working beside him looked at him in surprise. Not wanting to waste consultation time, I took a moment to reflect. "My father was a doctor," I began. Just to clarify, I didn't drop out of high school due to poor grades. Memories of my father came flooding back. He was often away, preoccupied with work, and much of his earnings went towards alcohol and nightlife, leading to significant debt. Despite his flaws, I owe a lot to him. His commitment to my education played a crucial role in my path. From a young age, I aspired to follow in his footsteps and never wavered in that dream. I excelled in my studies throughout elementary and middle school, and my mother always believed in me, saying, "Jessica will surely become a doctor." After my father's death and the need to start working right after middle school, my journey took a detour, but I kept learning diligently. I obtained my high school diploma and pursued medical school. But there's no way you have the money to go to college. My earnings were saved by my mom, and I also took advantage of scholarships, I replied. "Scholarships? For you?" His disbelief stung a bit, but I quickly composed myself and met his gaze. "You used to mock me, calling me a middle school dropout and questioning my intelligence. That was just because you didn't know the whole story." Mike glared at me, his eyes filled with anger. As the nurse whispered that the consultation time was almost over, I turned to prepare the medical chart for the next patient, casting a final glance at Mike. "Regarding the living expenses you wanted me to repay, I can pay them back right now, even double if you prefer. My current income exceeds yours." Mike's face turned crimson, clearly struck by my words. His pride seemed deeply wounded, and his anger was palpable as he breathed heavily. Realizing this was a public consultation room with medical staff bustling around, he stood up abruptly with a loud thud. "Just wait, you failed, doctor. I'm filing a complaint." With that, Mike stormed out of the consultation room. I watched him leave and let out a heavy sigh. Despite my physical exhaustion, I felt a surprising sense of relief. It seemed Mike had initially sought treatment at another facility but was eventually referred to the university hospital where I work. With a scowl on his face, he had returned to see me. After our divorce, Mike's life had taken a nosedive. The female coworker with whom he'd had an affair had rejected him, and rumors about his infidelity and our breakup had spread throughout his company, leading to his resignation. The blow to his pride was compounded by being turned down by 2 women. His alcohol and cigarette consumption had increased, which he carelessly suggested might have contributed to his heart problems. He was scheduled for major surgery soon, and while I did feel a twinge of sympathy for him, I couldn't completely forget his behavior during our marriage. Regardless of my personal feelings, I remained professional and committed to providing him with the best medical care. Mike still comes to my clinic for regular checkups. At one point, he even asked if I would consider remarrying him, but I politely declined. For now, I have no intention of remarrying and am content living with my family at my parents' home. It may sound boastful, but I'm well regarded as a doctor and earn more than enough to support my family. My days are busy and fulfilling, but occasionally I look back on our married life with a sense of emptiness.